Hello and welcome to my vlog of the third week of January 2022, and today's topic is going to be on the wider rule sets that exist in the BattleTech universe and how best to kind of incorporate them into your game. Now, obviously BattleTech is going through a big resurgence at the moment. It's becoming much more popular. I think certainly the most popular I've seen it since like the mid 90s, dare I say. So, with that in mind, obviously a lot of people have gone out now and bought things like a Game of Armoured Combat and the Clan Invasion box set, which is basically the expansion. And you will have the rule sets with those, and both rule sets are fantastic. The Game of Armoured Combat rule set is very like self-explanatory in regards like the very basics of BattleTech, and you can literally just get that out of the box. You get your 8 mechs and your cardboard standees and you can just go for it and play a game. The rules are very easy as well, and most importantly they actually give a very good like synopsis and overview of how to play within that rule set, which is something BattleTech has been slightly guilty of not doing properly in the past, I think. But this like new iteration of BattleTech really has like got a grasp on that and have basically started to make this game for, especially for new players, also that a new player can get access to this and then just like get right into it. I mean, I would guess if you didn't even know anything about BattleTech or record sheets or mechs or anything like that, you could pick up a Game of Armoured Combat and be playing within like 2 hours. Like, it really is like that simple. And I think that's something that BattleTech as a core rule set has always prided itself on, because it's not got all the like convoluted rules in there as a base game. However, you can add a hell of a lot of convoluted rules onto the game mechanics if you so choose to do so. Now, in recent years, obviously, gaming has like developed massively, mostly because of video games. Because obviously, video games have got like quite a set way of kind of handling mechanics, and that is so popular. That is the big beast of the gaming industry, so to speak. So it's just inevitable that will, or those influences will start to kind of make their way onto tabletop. So I think one knock-on effect that has had is that a lot of people now are really determined to get quite simple rule sets, because if you go from like computer games to tabletop and then you're having to read 100 different rules and remember lots of things manually as opposed to the game actually doing it for you, which is what a video game does, that can be very frustrating. So you've seen in recent years almost like a streamlining of a lot of games. Not all games. I still know a lot of 40k players who are just like, yeah, it's getting more complex for us. So I think it depends, obviously, on the game designers. I personally sit somewhere in the middle of that. I do like complexity in my game, but to coin a phrase, I don't know who said this, but I heard it recently, and it really kind of sparked something in my mind where I thought, wow, that's really is a truism. When I heard somebody say, the best games are very easy to learn, but very difficult to master. And the basic iteration of BattleTech, as you get it from a Game of Armoured Combat, I think really fits that description. It's a game that you can pick up really quite easily. Once you kind of get your head around Gator, everything's like super easy. Obviously, Gator is just the kind of the shot modifier that we all use. So, it will kind of determine whether you have to roll a 4 or an 11 on 2d6 to make the shot or whatever else you need to roll. And once you kind of understand that and like heat management, and then the tactics kind of come, and that's where it gets very complex. So BattleTech as a whole is a very complex like mechanic underlying the actual game as is that you are rolling dice for. Because obviously, there's a lot of like skirmish element to it. I'm talking like classic BattleTech here, when you kind of go lance versus lance. A lot of like outmaneuvering. So, for instance, if you had a mech coming at you that had its big gun on its right hand side, the chances are you're going to try and get a mech to hit it on that right hand side so that you can do more damage to that gun, potentially get a crit on that gun. That's where the complexity comes in within BattleTech. And that's personally what I like. I like the whole like underlying unconscious complexity, if you want to put it that way, as opposed to the whole like the 40k edict of, well, now you're going to have to roll 15 dice and know 10 tactic rules to basically come up with an outcome to this. I despise that in games. It's not a matter of me thinking that's like too simplistic or anything. It's purely because I think when you start a game, you kind of want to have, say, like an evening of fun, right? So if you start at 7 o'clock in the evening, I'd kind of like to be finished by 10, right? I don't want to kind of think, oh, well, it's now midnight and we've still got like another quarter to run on this game. Obviously, it changes if you are like running in a competition where you start like a lot earlier, but for the vast majority of game players, I mean, you're talking probably well in excess of 90%. What we want to do is to have like a friend group that play a game, and we all understand the same rule sets, and then we can just kind of crack on and fit it around lives as opposed to it becoming our life, if that makes sense. And I think that's what they've really kind of hit a stroke of genius on when they've re-released the BattleTech box set. Is that, and they've done this before as well. There have been other like iterations of the BattleTech starter box, if you want to put it that way. And I'm not talking about the starter box where you get the Wolverine and the Griffin and there's no heat management. That's like very much a beginner thing. I'm talking about like a game of armored combat where you get everything in the box ready to play. So one thing to keep in mind though is obviously because the mechanic is so basic, I think eventually you will start naturally want to gravitate out. You will start thinking about things like, well, I thought you could run tanks and infantry in BattleTech, or I thought you could run planes and helicopters and things like that, especially if you play the computer games, because if you play like, say, MechWarrior 5, you'll see there are like VTOLs all over that, and tanks and turrets and everything else. And there's no description in the kind of the base rules on what to do with that. That being said, like the first thing that I think you really need to do is decide if you want to take that direction, because BattleTech is all about the big stompy machines, right? Trying to get away from calling them robots, because they're not robots, they're piloted by mech warriors, so they're kind of just machines. And I think like if that's your kind of direction, if you just want to kind of have lance-on-lance combat and you're quite happy playing classic, then great. You know, you're happy with the box set that you've got. Probably get the expansion pack with the clan invasions, because that will give you a lot more like mechs to field, and it really drives the narrative forward as well, because the clans are so kind of central to the BattleTech backstory and narrative, given that they're kind of the SLDF exodus and then they come back. So you can't really have a complete understanding of the universe without the SLDF clan, whatever you know, like that kind of lineage of the story kind of goes full circle, and then it all kind of then kicks off in the inner sphere in around 3050. But to do that, you kind of need to get those two, and that would be my advice. First of all, it's like get the two box sets, paint them up, make sure you kind of have a good grasp of the rules, and then if you like it, if you enjoy it, then have a think about how you want to expand it. And from my kind of personal story in this, when I kind of came back to BattleTech a few years ago and then managed to get a hold of a game of armored combat, the first thing that I really decided was I can't stand the hex grids. Like, they've got to go. I mean, literally, I open the box sets and they go right on eBay, because the thought of having to play 3D miniatures that I've painted up on hex maps just doesn't do it for me at all. So I basically went and, you know, bought lots of like terrain and scenery and things like that I've kind of got all on tap now to play the games. But then you have to ask yourself the question, well, the rules are written for a hex grid, right? So it will continuously say like the movement of mech X is like 4 movement hexes. So then all you then have to do is you have to do the equation. It's not even an equation. You just kind of relate it to inches. So 4 hex quadrants, whatever you want to call them, becomes 4 inches, easy. So as long as you've got a ruler or a tape measure, you are fine with that. Same for shooting distance as well. But there are other like little things that you do need to change. For instance, like on a hex grid, everything, it's very obvious where everything lies. So like if you've got like a level 1 point and it's between you and another mech, you can see the top part of the mech, you can't see the bottom part. So if you roll to hit the legs, you'll basically hit the level 1 as opposed to the mech, which makes sense. When you're doing scenery, it's slightly different to that. So you do have to kind of modify rules to it. Like, for instance, is a mech's leg hidden behind a piece of terrain? And does that therefore discount that? I personally do like a homebrew rule for that, which is basically I've just stolen it completely from the first iteration of Kill Team, which is if any point of the mech is undercover, then it takes a plus modifier to hit. That's it. I try not to get too complex with that because I think what you don't want is to kind of constantly be like ducking and weaving and saying, can I see that thing's leg? Or what? It just makes for a convoluted game. So I think you can really kind of simplify the rule set. I think like there's no kind of set way to do that. You'll find often in BattleTech that people have their own kind of homebrew rule sets. Happens quite a lot, and there are like YouTube channels that do that where they will create their own thing. I've listened to a couple of podcasts where they will kind of have their own like tournaments with their own rule sets. That's great, obviously, for those like the individuals that want to engage with that. For me, though, personally, I only want to play the official stuff. To each their own and everything. It's the same thing as like if I wanted to kind of really get into big mech battles, I'd play Alpha Strike. We'll talk about Alpha Strike separately, but Alpha Strike is something where like if you are running like 20 mechs versus 18 mechs or something like that, you really wouldn't be able to use the classic rule set because it would take forever. So you kind of, Alpha Strike is a way of speeding that up. But there are people who have kind of done like mix and matches between Classic and Alpha Strike. I kind of do that myself as well, but I simply don't publish it. Like it's just something that I use. And if I'm teaching people, I will say, look, this is the rule set as is, but I've got these like homebrew rules that I like to play because it makes things simpler, speeds things up. I've talked about that on previous recordings, like little homebrew rules that I have, things that speed the game up or increase damage outputs, which inherently then speeds the game up, things like that. So as you go on, you will find things that you want to kind of incorporate into your game. If you're playing just with like say within your own confines of your own gaming group or something like that, you obviously just all agree on what you want to do and go forward. If you're playing competitively, changes drastically. Then you have basically to do the rule of the law, which is whatever sits in the books. BattleTech, though, in my experience, has a very like nondescript competitive section. It's not like, say, 40k where you've got like tournaments and people showing up to official tournaments and like Games Workshop saying, well, you can only bring like these models now. And BattleTech is like the absolute opposite from that. It's very like easygoing. And I think if they did do tournaments, the only thing people would really probably turn up for is the lunch because I've known enough BattleTech players to know that's all they're really interested in. So like I think it's what I'm saying, I'll put it another way, I'll put it more politely than that. It's really like friendly as opposed to like people sat around like, seriously into it. And it's one reason why I've never bought into this thing that BattleTech is going to somehow replace 40k, because the whole makeup of BattleTech is so different. Like it's so much more like for the joy of it and the setting and the game. A lot of narrative players, obviously. For 40k, I mean, they'll run like huge tournaments where like hundreds of people show up and they record it and it's all competitive and there is prize money and things like that. Things like that may exist in BattleTech that I'm just not aware of. But for my mind, it's not something really that the game producers want to bother pushing, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it means that the community is much kinder and nicer as a whole, and I think the general consensus is that the BattleTech community is pretty phenomenal. I certainly feel that way. Like, I'm in the UK, so I'm kind of completely out of the bubble here. Like if you were somewhere like in the Midwest and you had, maybe 15 players in your local town that played it, I will be lucky to find like 2 or 3 players in like the entire county that I live in the UK who'd be interested in playing that much BattleTech or playing it regular. I can get people to do it, but it's usually me introducing them to the game, and then them, if they want to play it again, they'll come over to me as opposed to them collect it themselves. And that's because BattleTech really doesn't have that much like traction in the UK. But in other parts of the world, obviously, that will be very, very different. But my experience of it is that there is a lack of snarkiness and nastiness when it comes to the BattleTech community. Tends to be older men as well, and I mean that. Like, I mean, I'm 39, right? So I'm no spring chicken, but I'm probably considered quite young in like the BattleTech like community, whatever you want to call it. Usually you'll find it'll be like lads who are like in their like 50s now or something like that. And again, not always. Obviously, we are seeing a lot of new players come into it now, and long may that continue, hopefully. But I think, like, generally speaking, it's older, wiser heads who are very, very accommodating, willing to teach people, willing to kind of like swap models and play whatever you want to play. So if you want to play narrative or competitively, they'll probably have a rule set for that, or they'll bring their books. And it's, anyone I've met or kind of corresponded with in BattleTech is wonderful. A good example is just a chap that I was speaking to on eBay the other day, who's somebody who went to Barnes and Noble and bought like loads and loads of the Wolf Dragoons box sets, and then was posting them over to people in International. And he basically, I mean, yeah, okay, it was a tiny bit of a moneymaker for him, because he was basically charging like between $10 and $15 for doing it. That's completely okay, by the way. Like, if he's taking the time to go to a Barnes and Noble, stand in a queue with probably maybe like 20 of these things, and then walk out with it, he's got every right to I'm quite happy to give him $10, $15 for doing that, because the alternative for me is, I have to, if I wanted to buy it myself, I literally have to get on a plane to America to buy this, because Barnes and Noble will not deliver to the UK. And I got speaking to him a bit on eBay, because obviously it's international shipping, so it goes through their, it goes through like eBay's international clearance house. It came this week as well, so it came super quick. It came in like 7 days. So I basically pay for shipping, and I pay for, like, I give him his like finder's fee, whatever you want to call it, agent fee. He literally charged, for a box that costs $30 in store, he charged $40 for it. I think, no, $45 or something like that, and then plus shipping on top of that. Would you get that in like other gaming communities? You might. I mean, I think what you'd find, there's a lot of people would take advantage for that. Like, people would probably buy it and then scalp it themselves. That might happen as well. Like, you might see like Wolf Dragoons box sets pop up on eBay in Britain and be like, yeah, that's now going for £100 or something. But my point is that, like, this guy clearly knew, I don't know, maybe he was like someone who does run a podcast or is quite involved with the BattleTech community, who knew that international people couldn't get this box set and wanted it. So he basically was like, okay, give me a little bit of like finder's fee, commission, whatever you want to call it, and I'll post this out to you in quick double time. That's lovely. Right, like, you can't, like, you can never ever overemphasize how important that is for a community when you've got people in it who are that generous. And I think that is the easiest thing in the world for him, would have been to kind of do that and literally, I mean, should have, if he'd have put these on eBay for like $80, $100, I would still have bought one. That's how much I wanted the Annihilator, by the way. I was like desperate to get that Wolf Dragoons box set, but he didn't do it. I think he knew that. BattleTech, especially in like Germany and Australia, is huge. Britain, not so much. So I'd imagine that he sold every like international offering for that box set like in double quick time, and that speaks volumes, obviously, of the community, and that there are people who are willing to go like above and beyond to do that. Also worth noting that even the people holding the kind of IP at the moment in Catalyst Games, they only did that limited release on one box set with Barnes and Noble, which I can personally live with. I mean, it was slightly annoying when I was having trouble getting hold of it, because I've bought so much from Catalyst, and I was like, if I could just get this on their website. That'd be amazing, but we couldn't. So it's only one box. It's a very like unique box as well. It's not part of like the core like game or anything. You know, it's not like they just put in, I don't know, like the blackjack, the rifleman. It's like standard like 30-25 iterations in a box and then selling it exclusively. It's 5 very, very specific mechs to a very specific mercenary outfit in BattleTech. So that's fine. But yeah, like I said, we are very, very privileged to be in that kind of community. But the kind of the negative side of that, if you want to, negative's too harsh a word really, but one of the kind of fallouts for having that like very friendly environment, so to speak, is that I think it's very, very difficult to then like get the competitive play off the ground. And competitive play really, really drives gaming systems. Not in terms of numbers, like only a tiny percentage of people play competitively. But what you'll find is that people who play competitively and are then very vocal about it, so they'll go to tournaments, be interviewed, do their own podcasts, do videos like this on YouTube, whatever else, they will then be the ones that the community then look to, because they're the ones that are kind of doing the math behind the setting, and they'll say things like, well, I've worked it out that this weapon is like way better than this one in this situation. And obviously if you're into a gaming set, that then becomes like super interesting. But only a tiny, tiny percentage of people are really, really engaged in that. And with BattleTech, it really is like virgin territory in a lot of ways, because I still find now like there is no like data, or there's very like conflicting data on like tactics in BattleTech. So someone will say something like, well, I think the PPC is better than the L laser. And there's the argument to that is, no, I think the L laser is better because reason X, Y, and Z. The truth is in there somewhere. You just have to kind of get the calculator out and add in all those modifiers for range and heat and everything else. And you could literally say, well, the PPC is 2.3% more efficient and does X more damage, ergo we suggest that you take a PPC as opposed to an L laser. Doesn't look like anyone's really ever done that. I mean, obviously I've not gone through everything, so I'm sure some people have done that in their own kind of personal space. But my point is that there seems to be a lot of like subjective opinion in BattleTech, which is great, obviously, because then the debates around it are really interesting. But like I said, the counter to that is that, like, then you've got a competitive scene it's not really driving the game function as much as it probably could be if you look at things like Warhammer 40k or Kill Team or Age of Sigmar, things like that, where they've got like super competitive scenes where they keep re-releasing rules, and that's obviously a can of worms I'm not going to open here, because BattleTech has not done any kind of rule iteration changes in years. They add things to it continuously, but then it's just like a buffet of what you want to pick and choose. Anyway, that segues me nicely into the 3 things that it was 4 things really, 3 books and a deck of cards basically that I think you can really look at to enhance your BattleTech experience as a new player. So I'm going to kind of just assume that you've got a game of Armoured Combat and Clan Invasion. Even if you've just got a game of Armoured Combat though, that's fine. If you have the beginner box set, then the next step for you, if you're interested, is a game of Armoured Combat. Don't listen to what I'm going to say because it'll confuse you in this next section. So that will be our next part of call. But let's just say you've got a game of Armoured Combat and Clan Invasion, and you like it. You've played some like Hex map games, and you enjoy the classic system as well, where you're kind of doing the damage sheets, that kind of thing. Wonderful. So what do you then do? What are the 3 or 4 things that you really kind of need then to kind of push on? Well, the first one, and I've got my my book set here, this is Total Warfare. A very, very chunky book, as you can see there. This, I think, is it's not out of date. None of these books are out of date. I mean, you could pick up a version of this from the 80s and 90s. It's still relevant. Depending on when it's been published, it might not have certain like narrative sections in there, or there might not be some equipment in there because it doesn't exist yet. But in my mind, I think this is maybe like a 10-15-year-old variant of this book. I think they may have released a new version, but I'm not 100% sure. But either way, this one will do you just fine. It's the one with a big chunky atlas on the front. The new one just looks a little bit more modern, like it's got more colour on there. I think that's the one anyway. I mean, I could be wrong. This might be the latest one, and that's the, you know, from 2000 something. I really don't know. All I know is that this book has pretty much everything you need to kind of start filling out your BattleTech experience. Now, it's hefty, and a word of caution before you pick up this book. First point to say is that you won't use most of it because there is a lot of craziness in here where I would be amazed if anyone kind of went into that level of depth. Kind of gets worse as we're going to go through this talk as well, in terms of like levels of complexity that I just can't imagine anyone doing. But as long as you can kind of read between the lines and think, yeah, that's not for me, I don't know why there's a big chapter on this section because I'm not interested, just skip it and move on to whatever section like appeals to you. So the main point on this site is it gives you rules on things like how to use tanks, how to use infantry, how to use vehicles, things like that. One problem that this book actually does has, though, and it's quite a severe problem, is that it's not very well structured. I was going to say written then. It's completely fine as far as a written document goes, but putting my like copywriter hat on here, and if you've watched the channel before, you know that I was the lead copywriter for one of the biggest law firms on earth for quite some time. So kind of used to like copy editing, thought leadership, and you know, commercial documents for clients, things like that. This is way too long, way too convoluted, and it doesn't really get to the crux of the matter in a lot of places, and I think that's really problematic for it. So if you are going to buy and read this, set aside some time and just keep in mind that you're probably going to have to skip a lot of it. I'd also recommend heartily that you take notes. I certainly did, because it's almost impossible to find something in here due to how badly it's structured. I wish I'd have been into BattleTech when this was published and knew the guys that wrote it, because I would have literally said to them, I'll literally condense this down for you. Not condense it, like as a document it's absolutely fine, as a big which you're going to expect a big rule set in a game set this old, but I'd be like, can we just get like a 10-page synopsis of everything you want to say, like with, and they put tables at the back, but that's not enough. Like I want to know like the mechanics of how like infantry work. I want that on a page, right? The mechanics of how a tank runs, I want that on a page. You know, instead you've got this like, you're constantly dipping from section to section, and it's slightly like makes you slightly mad. I was certainly getting quite frustrated when I was reading it. That's not good, because I consider myself to have quite a long attention span. And if I was struggling to get through this, I would probably guess about 70% of people will probably just like get into the first few paragraphs and then just like fling it aside, which is a shame, because I think it goes back to that, like the pros and cons of this being a game set designed by gamers for gamers. Yes, that's very healthy, but one of the negative factors of that is that sometimes they lack that commercial bite that they need to kind of just tell people what you need to do. I don't know if it comes from a place of like lack of confidence, or that they're just so proud that they've got this like they're kind of one of their like say for want of a better term, like brand selling points is that they are gamers for gamers, and that they're doing this, you know, not just for the money, it's for their love of it, which is absolutely true. That's not some kind of sham logo on their part. You can tell that's true. But what the point I have with it is, you always then have to be thinking, though, how you're going to like coerce new players into the game. And giving them this when they want to develop the game is really not going to hit home. So, like I said, I'd get this and I'd go through it, make notes, and keep it very much pinch of salt. And I would probably estimate that there are only maybe like 10 to 15 pages in this that I will actively utilise in games. When you find something that works for you, though, it's great. Something else in here as well that they give really, really good levels of detail on is the new equipment. So it will kind of tell you what like the ECM does, the Beagle probes, things like that you don't get in like a game of Armoured Combat, and you will see that all over the record sheets. So if you are using like a Raven, for instance, which is the created by the Capellans around 3025. It has the ECM suite, but you're like, well, I don't know what that is. All it does is basically take up a critical slot. You don't know how that is utilized. It will actually tell you in this book. And I think like a lot of the like, equipment that they use like that adds a lot to the game, you know, especially if you're playing like hidden units, which is again something that this book tells you how to do in the back. It's like in the scenario sections. That gives you a lot more depth, a lot more like credence and a lot more substance to a game, and it's not overly complicated. A lot of the electronic systems in BattleTech are really simple. The ECM is very, very simple. Where they go wrong, and this is with anything with BattleTech, as soon as you kind of hit the Word of Blake, going into the Dark Age, I suppose the rot really set in the Fedcom Civil War, because they start to use like really weird electrical systems that I personally think destroys the mantra that I've got now with gaming, which is, you know, easy to learn, difficult to master. They basically take away from like the core joy of BattleTech. So I refuse to use like the master slave system, for instance, because I think it's rotten. Just no interest in it whatsoever. It spoils what should be a very, very simple like tactical-esque game. Anyway, so that's Total Warfare. You can usually get this for about I think I got it for about £30 a couple of years ago. Guessing it's similar rates. They are published still as well. They do limited runs on them, but they are gorgeous books. They've got lots of like cool artwork in there from like usually from old models. Mine certainly only has old models in there. There are none of the new plastics, but it looks great. It's big hard copy. Big hardback book as well, which makes all the difference when you going into a rule set. What you don't want is like a flimsy little soft back with something this big and meaty that you'll be kind of, you know, like reading it like on tabletop and flinging it around and stuff like that. So the second book, yes, we're just on the second one here. This is the next one. This is Tactical Operations. This is a book that I got relatively recently. Tactical Operations is, this I think is a new-ish version. It does cite 2021 on the back there in terms of the copyright, so I think this has been recently published. But the book content itself is certainly, you know, goes back quite a while. This particular book, I think, adds some really, really interesting parts to BattleTech that I certainly incorporate. But again, like with Total Warfare, there's a lot of ridiculous stuff in here. One thing that I saw, I can't think of anything I'd least like rather do either, is there's like a section for what happens to shots that you miss. So it's like you shoot at your target and then it misses, and then there's some kind of like function to say, well, does the shot go over here? And it's really weird, and it's like, why on earth would anyone want to go into that kind of like granular level on it? Like, talk about putting the brakes on your game. Anyway, I think it's basically made there for people who just want like an uber realistic version of the game, of reality. But for me, like, there's a line that you just should not cross, otherwise it starts becoming manic. And I think certain aspects of this particular book certainly get into that dangerous territory, let's just say that. One thing that I really, really appreciated in here, though, was like the rules on morale. I love that, because that really speeds the game up. Like, if you can break the morale of your opponent, there are rules in here for what happens, and that can potentially like end games or make them quicker, and I'm all for that, because I love classic. No time for Alpha Strike, really. So, you know, if I can get like a system in there where there are like limited turns, let's say we've decided in advance that we're only going to have like 10 turns or something like that, or there's kind of an objective point to capture or something on that level. If you include things like morale in that, and then put some of your own like homebrew rules in there, that's fantastic, obviously, and you'll get a lot out of that. And then you can usually run like classic games in like a couple of hours, which for me is like the absolute sweet spot on where you want to be. There are other rules in here as well that I really appreciate, and it's only actually over the last week that I've really had time to look in this book. I think I've read Total Warfare like cover to cover. This one, though, I've just been kind of picking at it for the last few months, and I went through there's like almost like an extension pack on how to use weaponry. So, for instance, and if you play BattleTech, you'll know this. Everyone moans in BattleTech about like AC weaponry and how bad it is. I do as well. Like, AC2s are just not worth, taking because they weigh a lot. They've got ammo. They barely do any damage. So it's just it was a mistake, obviously, when they were writing the game rule. It should have been like an AC4. That's kind of how I play it. I've done a previous video on that about homebrewing rules, and I kind of said then I kind of bump it up from a 2 damage to a 4 damage, and I bump AC5s up to 7 damage. This actually, though, as I would have expected, because this was written by people who have an understanding of game mechanics that I don't, they've actually come up with far better rules, which is that all ACs should be used as UAC, so they can all do double shots. But whereas a UAC jams on Snake Eyes, and then you can't use it again, and if you do that with an AC, if you try the double shot with an AC, if you roll a 3 or a 4 on 2d6, then you jam. If you roll a double 1, if you roll a Snake Eyes, the shell explodes in the AC, blows the gun up, and then does internal damage to you. So that's the risk that you're taking. But that's 1 in 36 of that happening. But I love that. I really, really like that idea that there's like a risk attached to ACs, and it gives UACs then a real boon. Well, they are the same, but it just kind of shows how good they are, that they don't, it's impossible for them to have the ammo blow up, or just one piece of ammo though, so it won't destroy your mech. It'll just do, if it's an AC2, it does 2 points of damage, so that's fine. Although not if you take a crit on there and then the crit gets the ammo, then your mech will explode. So you've got to be careful about how you'd use that and what AC2 you'd use it on. But I really like that, and a good example is with the Mauler, which has got 4 AC cannons in its torso. And I would quite happily, off the top of my head, I don't know where the ammo is situated, so you probably would have to be a bit careful with that. But I would quite happily be like, yeah, I'll just kind of, if it jams, it jams. I've got 4 of them, and I'm going to close it down from afar. So if I can just ping off and do like you're doing potentially 16 points of damage there, because it's basically 4 shots, 2 points of damage each, and then times 2 if you're doing double shots. So 16 points of damage. That's potentially as well like 8 crits that you might be getting. So, it really gives the ACs a little bit more credence. There's extra rules in here as well, machine guns, which is far better than the system I utilise, so I'll certainly be incorporating that into my rule set. They basically talk about, I've not read this for a week, but I think it was like D6 shots, whereas a lot of people use D3. I like D6 though, because that means you'll chew through the ammo very quickly. I usually change the range on machine guns. In this though, it's the same range, but you are basically chewing through the ammo a lot quicker and potentially doing a lot more damage. I like that. I like the risk reward there, because a lot of machine guns are on, like, say, light mechs, like the Locust, for instance. And if you get into the back and roll like double sixes on rear shots, you're going to potentially wreck any mech in the game. But the risk is obviously getting close to a much heavier mech who can potentially turn around and just wipe you off the face of the map. So, but again, risk reward coming into play there. So, absolutely would advise this as well. Again, it's not as thick as Total Warfare, that's to be expected, but offers some really like extra dimensions to the game, which I think are very nice. Third up, we have got Campaign Operations. Campaign Operations is a rule set that I really, really like to use. It's not really a rule set, it's just kind of guidance, really. It gives you like lots of ideas on how to run, say, like if you had like a group of friends and you all decided, well, we are going to create our own system, like what we solar system, but like a star system, where you would say like have X amount of planets and moons and things like that. There is actually an entire section in here on how to create your star system, which is awesome. So it kind of gives you all like it gives you a lot of science in there as well on like what the gravity is like, things like that. Like goes into such granular data. And if you're really kind of into whether it's like role play or tabletop play or whatever else with gaming, this is it's a really great book just to read. I mean, it gives you such great ideas. If you wanted to just run like a narrative play as well, it will kind of give you a lot of ideas on like prices for things like what a wage is like for a battalion or things like that. Stuff that you can incorporate into wider narrative play, especially if you've had like a group of friends who play BattleTech. You could say, well, we'll play in this star system, and you know, John, he's got a mercenary company, and you know, I don't know, Sandra, she's like the local defense force, and you know, Damien, he runs like a Karita, you know, I don't know, battalion or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you can really kind of get as creative as you want with that, and you could set your entire gaming system around that mechanic, and it gives you a lot of like very, very interesting ways to kind of run that. And again, it's more like an ideas book though, and it's very much like the other books as well. It's take and leave, but with this one I like the take and leave. With the other two, I'm like, this is going into too much data. With this one though, it's very watery, and it's very much like, you could do this or you could do that, and I appreciate that when it's within the confines of not the tabletop mechanic. I appreciate it when that's quite a like a big picture thing, and it just, you know, whatever you wanted to do with your BattleTech experience, I think campaign operations would be a very, very like good, you know, like starting place if you wanted to get into that level of data where you're running like maybe weekly or monthly events with people. Also tells you how to run things like a narrative campaign or a map-based campaign or a chaos campaign. So there's like lots of different things in there as well that are not necessarily the whole, well, this is like a huge thing that you're going to be playing over maybe a year. You can just like run a map and then use these rules, and it just gives you as well ideas on how to run like certain scenarios, tie them into narrative, things like that. But just a great read. I'd actually recommend this just as a book. I will literally, like, out of all of them, this is the one that I enjoy the most by some way, because it's so quirky and weird and like fun, and it's quite, there's like a not so much a narrative section to it, but like you feel very like it's immersive within the BattleTech universe. So I get a lot just from reading this and get like a lot of good ideas, and it's good fun. So they're kind of the three main books that if I can lift all these monsters up, all I think worth a look at. Again, depends on where you want to go with your BattleTech like journey, but I think the kind of synopsis that I gave for each book there will kind of give you an idea. So you may be thinking, well, yeah, I kind of like Total Warfare, but I'm not too bothered about the others. Or you might be thinking, actually, the campaign operation one sounds amazing, and that would be something I'd love to kind of get into. The final thing that I'm going to kind of discuss here is this tiny little deck of cards. And this is the Battlefield Support deck. Now, this for me is a bit of a work of art, because I have major drama in BattleTech with planes. Like, if you're going to seriously play BattleTech, you have to have space for air combat, because how can you not, right? Like, it's not like it's set in the medieval age or something like that where there are no planes that exist. Like, this is set in the future where airspace will be king. You know, if you get that wrong, you're going to be completely toasted, because since we've had planes in military sphere, they have been absolutely centrifugal to any like military campaign. But I really can't stand the mechanics for how planes work in the actual tabletop game. They are included in those, in the two books that I mentioned there. There's a lot of detail in Total Warfare and Tactical Operations on how to run planes. Personally, I don't like it at all. I think planes are absolutely the wrong setting for tabletop. I think the only way I can see that planes would work is if you had something like what's the new game from Games Workshop? Aeronauticus? Something like that. But you basically, like, you're playing in the sky, and you are like, the other one, X-Wing, obviously, this the Star Wars game, where you are literally controlling like a squadron of fighters or a warship or a, you know, whatever, and you're basically like, there's things in there, there's like thrust and drift and stuff like that, but it's only the actual like air, space, whatever you want to call them, units that are actually fighting. I think when you try and combine the two, it becomes an absolute convoluted mess, and I don't like it at all. This, though, fixes that, because in this, you get lots of like, it's basically, it incorporates like a card game into BattleTech, where it has things like artillery and planes and mines, things like that, things that just add such a different like dimension without the hassle of having to kind of keep record sheets for planes and all the nightmarish like thrust and can I see this in the air when trust me, it's a nightmare, and I'd advise nobody go anywhere near it because it's crap. It's fine, like I said, if you would play, there is like the Aerotech version of BattleTech where you're playing like dropships. That's very much on the same kind of field as X-Wing, so I'm sure that's fine. Again, I'm not interested in it, but when you combine the two, you just get a convoluted mess. And this really fixes that. And you can get this set of cards, I think, for about $10, if that. Might be cheaper. Well worth getting. You need a pack for every player, so if you're going to have like 4 of you playing, probably best to get everyone a pack, or tell everyone to get a pack. I just got 2 when I got them. I got them from Catalyst directly. Really good as well. It's very, very simple, and it just adds a little bit of an extra like flavour to the game. So they are the 4 things really. I think if you structure your game around what you want and then kind of look at those like extra like curricular books, whatever you want to call them, which are kind of outside the kind of core rule set, you'll have a lot more fun playing BattleTech, and it will be a lot more interesting for, you know, like giving depth to the game, or giving you some like extra like nuances that you don't really get with a core rule set. Then combine that obviously to whatever floats your boat in terms of the setting. So for me, that's like I wanted to very, very quickly get actual like 3-dimensional terrain. I wasn't interested in hex sheets. I would be so happy if Catalyst would actually create like a 3-dimensional terrain thing, like do it as a Kickstarter or something. I would get that immediately. But I don't think they will. A third party will probably do it. And to be fair, I've got a lot of good terrain now anyway. And I wouldn't mind a hex system as long as it was on 3-dimensional terrain. But I cannot play like 3-dimensional models like mechs, which I've spent all that time like collecting and painting, and then put them on like a paper map. Not going to happen. So yeah, things like that. Decide what you want to do first. Explore around that. And then think about those 4 things, of these 4 items that I've showed. There is another one as well. There is another book called Interstellar Operations, which just looks ridiculously complex. That's basically like campaigns in space. So like you're not just like necessarily dealing with like a little company or battalion of mechs or whatever. I think that's more along the lines of, well, you are House Steiner and you're going to be trying to defeat the Kurita. What are you going to do? That just terrifies me, and I've got it just like no, like I'm quite happy just playing the little skirmishy-esque games within the wider confines of the universe, and I genuinely think that's where most people sit as well. So there you are. Anyway, I hope you found that helpful, and I think I'll end it here. I think that's gone on for quite a while now, so hope you enjoyed that, and I will hopefully catch you all next time.